I didn't argue. I didn't cry. I just set my coffee mug down on the kitchen counter, the same counter I'd installed myself 31 years ago, picked up my jacket from the hook by the door, and walked out into the February cold without a word. I'm 64 years old. 3 weeks before that morning, I'd buried my wife of 38 years in the frozen ground of Millbrook Cemetery. And my son-in-law had just told me the house I'd built with my own hands was no longer mine to sleep in. I remember standing on the porch for a moment, looking out at the bare oak tree in the front yard. Rosalind had planted it the year we moved in. It was just a sapling then, barely taller than our daughter, who was 4 at the time and kept trying to water it with her toy watering can. Now it was enormous. It shaded the whole front of the house in summer. I looked at that tree for a long time, long enough that my breath fogged in the air and my fingers started to go numb, and then I walked to my truck and drove away. That was a Tuesday. Let me go back a little further, because none of this makes sense without the beginning. Rosalind and I bought the lot on Cranberry Hill Road in 1991. It wasn't much to look at, half an acre of weedy scrub on the edge of town, a crumbling foundation from some old outbuilding, and a rusted mailbox post with no mailbox. But the price was right, and I could see what it could be. I was 33 years old and I had a good back and time on my hands. I was a finished carpenter by trade. I knew to build things. I spent 2 years on that house. Evenings, weekends, every spare hour I had. My buddy from the old crew, a man named Aldous. Wait, I can't use that name. Let me think. A man I'd worked with for years, I'll call him Ray. Ray and I poured the foundation in the spring of '92. My father-in-law came down from Vermont with his truck and helped us frame the walls. Rosalind was pregnant with our daughter that first summer, and she'd sit in a lawn chair in the shade with a glass of lemonade and read out loud to me while I worked. She said it kept her from being bored. I think she just liked to feel close to what we were building. We moved in before it was finished, technically. The kitchen had no backsplash and 2 of the bedrooms had bare drywall for almost a year. But it was ours, no mortgage we couldn't manage, good bones, and every nail in it driven by someone who loved the people who were going to live there. We raised our daughter Nessa in that house. Our son Cliff, he came 4 years after Nessa. He grew up there too, learned to ride a bike in that driveway, broke his arm jumping out of the oak tree when he was 9, and spent 6 weeks in a cast decorated with everyone's signatures. Rosalind kept a door frame in the hallway where she measured both kids every birthday. I never painted over those marks. I couldn't. It was always understood, at least by me, and I thought by everyone, that the house was Rosalind's and mine until we weren't here anymore, and then it would go to the kids equally. Simple as that. I never had a lawyer write it down because it seemed obvious. That was my first mistake. The second mistake was more complicated. When Nessa was 26, she brought home a man named Dex. Dexlin Pruitt. He went by Dex. He was from somewhere in Georgia, spoke with a soft drawl, always had a compliment ready, always remembered to hold the door. Rosalind liked him immediately. He had what she called good manners, which for her meant he looked you in the eye and didn't check his phone at the dinner table. I was more cautious, but I tried to keep an open mind. He made Nessa happy. That counted for a lot. They got married in 2019, outdoor ceremony at a farm about 20 miles from here. It rained a little in the morning but cleared up by noon. I walked Nessa down the aisle and I cried, which I hadn't expected to do. I thought I was prepared for it. I was not. The first few years were fine. They rented an apartment in the city, both working, doing well. Then the pandemic hit. Things changed the way they changed for everyone. And somewhere in there Dex's attitude started shifting in ways I couldn't quite name at first. Small things. He'd make comments about money. Not directly at me, but angled toward me, like remarking on what a property like ours must be worth now, or how the market had changed. He started having opinions about what should be done with the place. Upgrade the heating system, put on a deck addition, things like that. I didn't mind the ideas. I minded the way he said should, like the decisions were already his to make. In 2022, Rosalind got sick. It started as fatigue, which she attributed to everything: poor sleep, the season, getting older. By spring, she had a diagnosis, stage 3 ovarian cancer. We didn't talk about it to many people at first. That was her preference. She was a private person, Rosalind. She didn't want to be treated differently, didn't want people bringing casseroles and looking at her with that particular kind of sadness. She wanted to just keep living, and so we did, Or we tried to. I won't go through those 2 years in detail. I don't have the words for most of it, and even if I did, I'd keep them for myself. What I'll say is that Dex and Nessa moved into the house with us in early 2023, officially to help, and that for the first several months, it genuinely seemed like that's what it was. Nessa sat with her mother. She cooked. She handled the medical appointments I couldn't drive to, alone because my hands would shake too badly on the highway. Whatever else has happened, I won't take that away from her. She loved her mother. I know that. Dex helped with the house. Fixed the porch railing I'd been meaning to get to for years, repainted the garage, installed a new water heater. I was grateful. I told him so. I think now about how he must have been calculating the whole time, how much work he was putting in, how he planned to frame that later. At the time, I just thought he was being a good son-in-law. Rosalind died on a Thursday morning in November, just after 6 o'clock. I was holding her hand. It was very quiet. Outside the window, the oak tree had lost most of its leaves, and the branches were bare against a pale sky. She had asked me once, a few months before, to make sure that tree got trimmed properly. She worried about one big branch over the roof. I told her I would. I still haven't done it. I'm not ready to climb a ladder and look at that roof and not think of what she said. The funeral was the following Monday. Nessa handled most of the arrangements, which I let her do because I was barely functional. I stood at the graveside and shook hands and said thank you and meant none of it. Not because I wasn't grateful, but because I was so far underwater that sounds weren't reaching me properly. My son Cliff flew in from Seattle. He stood next to me the whole time. He didn't say much. Neither did I. That was fine. That night, after everyone had gone home and Cliff had fallen asleep in his old room, Dex came and found me at the kitchen table. I was sitting with a cup of coffee I hadn't touched, just looking at my hands. He pulled out the chair across from me and sat down, and I thought he was going to say something about Rosalind, something ordinary and kind. Instead, he put a document on the table. I had this drawn up a few months ago, he said. I was going to wait, but honestly I think it's better to have things clear. I looked at the papers without touching them. My eyes weren't focusing well. I could see it was some kind of legal document. I could see Rosalind's name, and my name, and what looked like a property description. What is this? I said. It wasn't really a question. My voice came out flat. With Rosalind gone, the property ownership is a little ambiguous, he said. I've talked to a lawyer about it. Since Nessa and I have been living here and improving the property, there's a case to be made that we have an equitable interest. This just formalizes that. It protects all of us. I looked at him for a long time. He didn't look away. That's the thing about Dex, he had a way of holding eye contact that felt like confidence. But I think now was just practice. This is my house, I said. Of course, he said. This just clarifies things going forward. I didn't sign anything. I said I needed to sleep. He said, of course, take your time. But there was something in his voice, a kind of patience that didn't feel like patience. It felt like certainty, like he already knew how this ended. He found me again in the morning. This time Nessa was with him. She didn't look comfortable. I'll say that much. She stood a little behind him, her arms crossed, looking at the floor more than at me. I wanted to ask her privately what was happening, but I didn't get the chance. Dad, she said, we need to talk about what happens next. With the house. The house, I said, is mine. Technically, Dex said in that smooth voice. With Rosalind's name on the deed and the estate in probate, things are a bit more complicated than that. Rosalind's share passes to me, I said. That's how a joint tenancy works. He smiled at me the way people smile at children who've said something almost right. That depends on exactly how the deed was structured, he said. There are some questions our lawyer wants to clarify. I stood up. Get out of my kitchen, I said. He didn't move right away. He looked at Nessa and she looked at me, and there was a long moment where everything in the room felt very still. Then he put another paper on the table. This one I did look at. It was a letter from a law firm in the city. It said that on behalf of their clients, my daughter and son-in-law, they were asserting a claim to the property based on equitable interest, improvements made, and a document signed by Rosalind 6 months before her death, transferring a 50% interest in the property to Nessa. I sat back down. Rosalind signed this, I said. She did, Dex said. She'd never told me. She wanted to make sure Nessa was provided for, he said. She was worried about what would happen if. He paused, and the pause was careful, practiced. If things changed. I didn't say anything for a long time. The document in front of me had Rosalind's signature at the bottom. Her handwriting, unmistakably. But something about the spacing of the letters was wrong. She had very particular handwriting, a small, precise cursive she'd developed as a girl and kept her whole life. The R in her first name had a specific loop to it, a little extra curl she always made. The R on this document was close, but it wasn't right. I folded the paper very carefully, put it in my pocket, and said I needed to go think. Dex said, not unkindly, "Don't take too long. We need to sort this out." I drove to my son Cliff's hotel. He'd checked in the night before, hadn't wanted to crowd the house. I sat down across from him at the little table in his room and put the paper in front of him and watched him read it. He looked up at me. "Mom never told you about this." "No," I said. He looked at the signature for a long time. He knew his mother's handwriting as well as I did. He'd grown up watching her write letters, shopping lists, birthday cards. She was one of those people who still wrote things by hand whenever she could. "That R," he said. "Yes," I said. We didn't say much else that afternoon, but Cliff made 3 phone calls while I sat there. The first was to his own attorney in Seattle. The second was to a forensic document examiner he'd heard of through a colleague at his firm. Cliff worked in finance, dealt with contracts all the time, knew people. The third was to a retired detective named Gus Hollowell, who lived in our county and did private work on the side. I went back to the house that evening. I said nothing to Dex. I helped myself to the leftover food people had brought for the funeral, and I watched the local news and I went to bed. I lay in the dark, in the room I'd shared with Rosalind for 30 years, and I made myself breathe slowly and think clearly. I am not a man who has ever done anything dramatically. I've built things with my hands, fixed what's broken, paid what I owed, told the truth when I had a choice. But I understood that what was happening was not something I could solve with a hammer. So I thought instead. I thought about the original deed. It was in the fireproof box in the closet of my workshop, where I kept all important documents. I'd never moved it. No one else knew it was there. I thought about what I knew about trust law in our state. Not much, but some. When my father died years back, his estate had gone through probate, and I'd learned a few things about how property transfers work, what can and can't be done without both parties' knowledge. I thought about Rosalind. 6 months before she died, she had been tired and in pain and on medication that sometimes confused her. She had never once, in 38 years, made any significant decision without talking to me. Not one. By Thursday, Gus Hollowell had made some calls of his own. The document Dex had produced, the one with Rosalind's signature, had been notarized by a woman named Calloway. But Gus had looked up Calloway's commission records. Her notary commission had lapsed 14 months before the date on the document. She had no legal authority to notarize anything when that signature was supposedly witnessed. On Friday, the forensic examiner submitted a preliminary finding. The signature on the transfer document showed signs inconsistent with Rosalind's known handwriting samples, specifically in the formation of capital letters and the pressure pattern of the pen strokes. Her handwriting in the last months of her illness had become slightly tremulous, softer. This signature was firm and practiced, wrong in exactly the right ways to fool someone who'd never looked carefully. Cliff called me Saturday morning. "Dad," he said, "we need to get ahead of this." He was right. I called a real estate attorney in the city, a woman I'd been referred to by an old client of mine, someone who'd used her in a boundary dispute years back. I met with her Monday morning and brought everything. The original deed, the insurance records, 31 years of property tax bills all paid in my name, and the preliminary forensic report. "The forged transfer document is actually the least of their problems," she said after reading for a while. "Do you know about the filing Dex made 2 months ago?" I didn't. She showed me. While Rosalind was still alive, while she was in hospice care, to be precise, Dex had filed a lis pendens on the property, a legal notice claiming an interest in the title. It had been filed quietly, without my knowledge. It was designed to cloud the title so that if I tried to sell or refinance, it would surface and complicate things. "He planned this carefully," she said. "Yes," I said. "He made one mistake," she said. The lis pendens had been filed under a claim of equitable interest based on improvements made to the property. The improvements he cited, the porch, the garage, the water heater, totaled a stated value that exceeded the actual documented costs by a significant margin, in some cases by more than double. He had submitted inflated figures signed under oath. That was fraud. Not the civil kind, the criminal kind. I want to be honest about what I felt in that office. I didn't feel triumphant. I mostly felt tired and sad. Because Nessa was in this too, and whatever Dex had done, whatever he'd convinced her to go along with, she was still my daughter. She still stood at her mother's graveside and wept into a white handkerchief while I held her hand. I didn't know how much she knew. I didn't know how much she'd been led into this and how much she'd chosen it. I wasn't sure I wanted to know. But I knew I wasn't walking away from my house. My attorney filed a motion to invalidate the lis pendens based on the fraudulent filing. She simultaneously filed a complaint with the County Fraud Division, attaching the forensic report on the forged signature. Gus submitted his findings on the notary. Everything moved faster than I expected. What I didn't expect was Dex showing up at my workshop door on a Wednesday afternoon. He came alone. That surprised me. I was planing a piece of walnut for a cabinet job. I'd gone back to work, partly because I needed the money and mostly because I needed to keep my hands busy. I heard the knock and opened the door, and there he was, standing in the cold without a coat, looking different than I'd ever seen him look. The smoothness was gone. He looked like a man who'd been up for several days. "I need to talk to you," he said. "All right," I said. I didn't invite him in. "I know you've talked to a lawyer," he said. "I have. This doesn't have to go the way you're going to make it go," he said. I looked at him for a moment. "You forged my wife's signature," I said, 3 weeks after I buried her. He opened his mouth and closed it. "You did it while she was dying," I said. "While she was in the bed we'd slept in together for 30 years. You had someone sign her name to a piece of paper." He looked at the ground. "Get off my property," I said, "and don't come back." He went. The criminal complaint proceeded. The district attorney's office took it up in the spring. Between the notary fraud, the document forgery, and the false filing, there was a solid case. Dex was charged on 3 counts. His attorney tried to negotiate a plea early on, which my attorney told me to expect. Nessa called me twice during this period. The first call she cried and said she hadn't known about the signature. That Dex had told her Rosalind had arranged it herself, and not told me because she hadn't wanted to upset me. I don't know whether that's true. I honestly don't. What I know is that she's my daughter, and I told her to get a good attorney for herself, separate from Dex, and to cooperate fully with the investigation if asked. She did. The second call she just said, "Dad, I'm sorry." And I said, "I know." And we stayed on the phone for a while without talking. That was enough for then. Dex took a plea in September. 18 months suspended sentence, probation, restitution. He and Nessa separated in July. The house, my house, was never in any real legal jeopardy once the forgery was established. The original deed was clean. The attempted transfer was void. The lis pendens was struck. Everything went back to the way it had always been. I refinished the kitchen floor that fall, something I'd been meaning to do for years. It took 3 days, working slowly, which is how I work now. My back isn't what it was. But the wood came up beautiful. Original white oak, tight grain, the kind of quality you can't buy anymore. Rosalind had always loved that floor. I had a conversation with my attorney the week after the sentencing. She asked me if I felt like I'd gotten justice. I had to think about that. "I feel like I'm still in my house," I said. "That's enough." She seemed to find that funny, though I hadn't meant it to be. What I didn't say, because I didn't know how to say it, was that I'd also found something I hadn't expected to find during those months. The forensic examiner had sent back the full report, pages of it, comparing Rosalind's known handwriting samples against the forgery. To do that work, she'd needed samples. I'd sent what I had. Letters Rosalind had written me over the years, notes, cards. The examiner returned them when the case was over, in a manila envelope with a cover letter. I sat at the kitchen table on a December evening and read through them. Some of them were from before we were married. A few were from the early years when I traveled for work sometimes, and she'd send a note to wherever I was staying. The last one was from 2 summers ago, when I'd been in the hospital for a knee surgery and she'd written me a card even though she'd visited every day. It just said, "I'll be there in the morning. Don't give the nurses a hard time. I love you more than is reasonable." I folded it back along its original crease and put it with the others. Outside, the oak tree was bare in the December dark. I could see it through the kitchen window. I had put up the porch light, the way I always did this time of year, and the light caught the lower branches. The ones close to the house. The ones Rosalind had asked me to trim. I'm going to do that in the spring, I thought. I'm going to borrow a proper ladder and do it right, and I'm going to do it slowly, and I'm going to think about her the whole time, and that will have to be enough. It won't be, of course. But I'm staying in my house. I built it. I earned it. And nothing about that has changed.